Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for another tier list. Today we're going to be going through the discography of Peter Gabriel, the legendary English musician and songwriter who was a pioneer in the progressive rock genre, being one of the founding members of the band Genesis. And after doing 6 albums with them, he would go on to have a very successful solo career filled with great albums that showcase his forward-thinking mindset when it comes to songwriting and the continued implementation of the ever-evolving technologies of the time. And when it comes to English songwriters, I think you can make a very strong case that he is one of the most important artists to contribute to the 70s and the 80s. And I'm very happy to be covering him for today's episode. So what I'm going to do is go through his 10 studio albums, starting with Peter Gabriel 1 and going up to I.O., and I will score each of them on this tier list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll talk a little bit about each album, let you know my thoughts, and we will see where we end up. And please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree, and how you would rank these 10 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. Alright, I think that's about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, starting out, we have his debut studio album from 1977, which is oftentimes referred to as Peter Gabriel 1 or Car, and I will give this an A. I think this is a very strong debut solo record, but I wouldn't say it's perfect. He does have a couple of other albums that I do think are a bit stronger, but this is still very good regardless. At this early point in his solo career, he was making an effort to separate his sound from Genesis by trying to write more simple and direct tracks, with the main emphasis being on the song. And he's trying out a lot of different stuff on here, with a couple of tracks that do have some Genesis influences, but also a lot of other songs that go into some uncharted territories with flavors of blues, stadium rock, barbershop quartet, as well as some orchestral elements with the London Symphony Orchestra playing on 2 songs. And because of that, one critique that a lot of people will give this record is that it sounds kind of scattered and all over the place from a stylistic standpoint. And I do agree with that, but I still think the songs on here are very strong. It's 9 tracks long with 5 songs on side 1 and 4 songs on side 2. For me, the strongest part of side 1 is the 2 opening tracks, Moribund the Burgermeister, which is the perfect opener with a great energy and intensity to it, and an awesome hard-hitting chorus with these really nice brass backgrounds. And Salisbury Hill is one of his most classic hits and a beautiful song, and a great example of a track in 7/4 time, which is an odd time signature and is typically a characteristic of prog rock music. I also really love the closer to side 1, titled Humdrum. Very cool keyboard and synth sounds, and lots of beautiful instrumental textures happening between the classical guitars and the flutes. For side 2, I'm not super crazy about the opening track, Slow Burn, but I think the 3 tracks that follow it are all incredible. Waiting for the Big One sets up a 6/8 bluesy vibe, but eventually veers off into some darker, more prog rock territories, which I absolutely love. Down the Dolce Vita is a great high-intensity rock track that does a good job of contrasting some of the other tracks on side 2. And Here Comes the Flood is a beautiful ballad that is more on the prog side of things and is a great closer to this record. So I think this was a very solid debut record that showed Peter dabbling in a lot of different musical territories in an attempt to flesh out his style and sound, and it produced a good handful of really solid tracks that will forever be timeless within his discography. So a great album, but not perfect, so I will give this an A. Okay, next we have his second studio album from 1978, commonly referred to as Peter Gabriel 2 or Scratch, and I will also give this an A. I think this is another very good album. I would say I like it slightly more than the first record, and I've noticed that some people place this album pretty low in their rankings, and I've never really understood why this record gets a bad rap from certain people. I think this was a very fun and adventurous album that is loaded with great tracks. On this record, Peter teamed up with Robert Fripp, who was actually also present on the previous record, but he takes on an even more prevalent role on this, doing production and contributing some more guitars, and I really love his influence on this record. I'm a guitar player, so that is definitely one of the reasons why I view this album so favorably. Stylistically, I would say this exists somewhere in between art pop and progressive rock, with a couple of stylistic detours here and there, but I would say it sounds a little bit more focused than the previous record in terms of the stylistic cohesion, but it still does take some twists and turns here and there in ways that some people might not find very fitting, but I really resonate with the songs on here. It's 11 tracks long with 5 songs on side 1. It kickstarts side 1 with a great rocking high energy track titled On the Air, and then it continues with some more very high quality tracks, with my personal favorites being DIY and A Wonderful Day in a One-Way World, which, believe it or not, is actually one of my favorite Peter Gabriel songs. That will probably be one of my weirdest takes of this entire video, but I just love the chorus of that track so much. Everything about it, between the groove, the vocal melody, the background synth parts, and just the overall feel-good mood that it produces. I cannot say enough good things about that track. For side 2, my favorites would be Indigo, which is a beautiful piano ballad with lush instrumental background parts, and 2 other tracks that I love are Flotsam and Jetsam, and the closer, Home Sweet Home, which is the perfect mid-tempo piano-centered track to conclude this album with. So I love so much about this record, between the songwriting, the use of the odd time signatures, the Robert Fripp influence, and the continued expanded use and experimentation of synthesizers and keyboards in a way that is very tasteful. But similar to the previous album, I don't think it's a perfect record, so I wouldn't say it qualifies for the top tier, but still very good regardless, so I will also give this one an A. Alright, moving on, we have his third studio album, which is oftentimes referred to as Peter Gabriel 3 or Melt, and I will give this an S. This is a spectacular record and an even further improvement upon Scratch. To me, this is the first album where it really sounds like he found that unique sound that defines him, and stylistically and sonically, this is definitely his most adventurous album to date. He brings in a lot of different influences on here, with elements of world music as well as systems music, which he had been influenced by from Steve Reich. And this is the first record to really feature the drum machine in a prominent role, and that is mixed with Phil Collins also playing live drums on a few tracks. And these drum parts are very interesting because there are no cymbals being used in order to avoid high sounds, and that was a very unorthodox approach to writing drum parts at that time, and is definitely a key ingredient to the sound of this record. In addition to the stripped down drums, we have a lot of different percussion instruments popping up as well, and lots of different synth sounds and sampling. The album is 10 tracks long, with 6 songs on side 1 and 4 songs on side 2, and side 1 delivers some exceptional tracks, opening up with Intruder, which has some seriously awesome dissonant guitar parts that create this awesome feeling of unease. And it's worth noting that this was the first song to use the gated reverb drum sound, which was revolutionary for the time. My other favorite songs from side 1 would be And Through the Wire, No Self-Control, and Family Snapshot. And Through the Wire would definitely be my favorite track from this record. It's got such an incredible and catchy chorus. For side 2, my 2 favorite tracks would be Games Without Frontiers and Lead a Normal Life, which has some really beautiful instrumental pairings going on to create these really beautiful textures. So I think this is an incredible album, both sonically and compositionally, giving us an amazing selection of fresh Peter Gabriel tracks that are filled with so many fascinating and innovative sounds that were radical to hear for the year 1980. And like I said, I think this was the album where his sound and style really became fully realized. So an incredible album. This one gets an easy S. Okay, next we have his fourth studio album from 1982, which is oftentimes referred to as Peter Gabriel 4 or Security, and I'm going to give this a B. I think this album is good, but I do think it's a slight downgrade from what he had done on the previous 3 records. This album takes a bit of a stylistic detour, with much more of a focus on rhythms, and incorporates a lot of drum machines, and the songs are in a general art rock, world beat, funk, and pop sort of foundation. It's 8 tracks long with 4 songs on each side, and I do think the majority of the songs on here are good, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that anything on here would make my favorite Peter Gabriel song list. And I don't think the good tracks on here reach the same highs as the good songs from the previous 3 records, but it does have some tracks that I do really enjoy, with the songs I Have the Touch, Shock the Monkey, and Lay Your Hands on Me. But of the first 4 self-titled albums, this would definitely be the one that I personally gravitate towards the least, but I still do appreciate it from a rhythmic standpoint, and obviously Peter is still experimenting with lots of different sounds and textures, and producing some really fascinating tones for 1982. For me, I just tend to resonate stylistically more with what he was doing on the previous 3 records, and as a guitar player, I also do miss the contributions from Robert Fripp, who is absent on here, so that's another another reason as to why I don't tend to gravitate towards this one as much as the others. But regardless of some of these critiques, this is still obviously a very good album. And for the right type of listener, I could definitely understand why this would be someone's favorite Peter Gabriel album, but I'm just not one of those people, and I tend to view this album as good, but not exceptional. So I will give this a B. Okay, next we have his fifth studio album from 1986 titled So, and this one gets an easy S. That shouldn't be a huge surprise to anyone. This is my personal favorite Peter Gabriel record, which I know is a cliche choice, but I think this album is just absolutely spectacular. The songwriting is top-notch, the production is top-tier, and the fusion of different styles creates a really nice dynamic track listing that feels very cohesive and keeps the listener engaged all the way through. It's 9 tracks long, and stylistically he gives us this great blend of art pop, world beat, funk, and soul. Side 1 kicks off with Red Rain, which would hands down be my favorite opening track of any Peter Gabriel record, and it would also make my top 10 favorite song list of his. And from that point on, he just keeps the momentum up, hitting us with one amazing track after the next, with Side 1 continuing with his classic hit Sledgehammer, which takes things in more of a funky direction, and then that is followed by my number one all-time favorite Peter Gabriel song featuring Kate Bush, titled Don't Give Up. In my opinion, this is one of the most beautiful songs to come out of the decade of the 80s, and Kate Bush's vocals add so much to the chorus of this track, and the pairing of Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush is one of the greatest pairings to come out of English art pop music, in my opinion. I will never get tired of that song. After that, Side 1 concludes with another amazing track titled That Voice Again. So far, I would say the first side of this album is perfect, and Side 2 keeps it up with another 5 tracks, with the poppy world beat flavors of In Your Eyes, the mellow stripped down vibe of Mercy Street, the funky flavors of Big Time, the experimental prog rock elements of We Do What We're Told, as well as the art rock flavors of the closing track This Is the Picture. For Side 2, my 2 favorite tracks would be This Is the Picture and In Your Eyes. And I will say this is one of those records where I do think the first side is a bit stronger than the second side, but that is certainly not a knock on Side 2. I just think all 4 songs on Side 1 are so exceptional that it's pretty hard to keep up with that. But I think this is an incredible record from front to back, and it contains my number 1 favorite Peter Gabriel track with Don't Give Up, in addition to multiple other songs that would make my favorite song list. So an incredible record, my personal favorite Peter Gabriel album, so this one gets an easy S. All right, next we have his 6th studio album from 1992 titled Us, and unfortunately I'm going to give this a D. I apologize in advance. I know some people are going to be upset with this one, and I know it's going to surprise some people, but this album just has never really resonated with me for whatever reason. It's got a few things that I do enjoy about it, but overall, I've always found this record to be a bit of a struggle to get through, and I know some people really enjoy it, and because of that, I've given it multiple chances and listened to it a decent amount of times to see if something would eventually click. But unfortunately, I'm always left with the same general feeling with very little changing from one listen to the next. There would be a gap of over 6 years between this record and the previous album, So, and there was growing frustration with the producer over how long it was taking to get this done. And for being an album that took so much time to create, I don't think it resulted in a very high quality record that justified the long wait time. It's 10 tracks long, and stylistically this record gives us a blend of pop, art rock, and world beat with some similarities to So on certain tracks, and he's utilizing a wide palette of different sounds and instrumentations. And I always appreciate Peter's experimentations from an instrument standpoint, but I don't think that that is enough to save this album if it's not being implemented over high-quality songs. And my number 1 critique of this album is that I do think it is a little bit too long. At almost 58 minutes in length with only 10 tracks, 8 of the 10 tracks on here are between 5 and 7 minutes long. And to me, a lot of these songs feel very drawn out and monotonous and do feel like a little bit of work to have to get through. And I do feel that way about a good chunk of this record, with a couple of songs that are probably some of my least favorite Peter Gabriel tracks, with songs like Love to Be Loved, Only Us, and Kiss That Frog. Of the 10 tracks on here, really the only 3 songs I would say I enjoy are Washing of the Water, which is a beautiful ballad with pretty piano work, and I also enjoy 14 Black Paintings, which is another beautiful ballad, and I think the closing track, Secret World, is nice, but other than those tracks, I find the remainder of the album either just okay or pretty dull and uninteresting, especially in comparison to the masterpiece of an album that preceded this one. So as much as it pains me to put this all the way down in D tier, if I only enjoy 3 of the 10 songs on here as a grade, that would be 30%, so it didn't feel right putting it in any other spot. So I do apologize to all of the fans of this record, but stylistically and compositionally, this one has just never really resonated with me, no matter how many times I've listened to it, and it would go down as my least favorite Peter Gabriel record. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this a D. Okay, next we have his 7th studio album from 2002 titled Up, and I'll give this a B. I think this is a solid record and a significant improvement from Us. I like the stylistic direction that he took on this one, going into some darker territories and incorporating some more prog and experimental elements that are reminiscent of sounds from his 3rd and 4th record. The pop flavors are much less prevalent on here than they had been on the previous couple of releases, and I think this was a great time in his discography to make that mood shift. It's 10 tracks long and features a really solid selection of songs, with my personal favorites being Darkness, My Head Sounds Like That, More Than This, and The Drop. I think Darkness is the perfect opener and completely sets that dark mood of the record and really brings the listener in to see where things are going to go next. My Head Sounds Like That is a beautiful piano-centered ballad with some awesome instrumental textures and vocal melodies. More Than This has a great energy to it and is placed perfectly towards the ending of the album. And The Drop is one of my favorite closing tracks of any Peter Gabriel record, with this stripped down vocal and piano track that is very pretty and also sad. And I would say that the opening and closing tracks are the 2 high points of this record, but largely I think most of what happens in between is also very good. The only couple of tracks that I'm sort of indifferent about are No Way Out, The Barry Williams Show, and Signal to Noise. And similar to what I said about the previous record, I do think some of these songs go on for a bit too long and can feel kind of sluggish at times, but I do think the songwriting is much more interesting and engaging on here in comparison to Us, and I wouldn't say that I get that slow-paced feeling on here as frequently as I did on the previous record, but it still is present from time to time and is one of the reasons why it felt fitting to put this in B tier. But aside from a couple of those minor critiques, I do think this is a solid record that has a lot of interesting new sounds that are sure to please any Peter Gabriel fan, and contains 2 of his strongest opening and closing tracks of any of his records, in my opinion. So a solid improvement from Us. I will give this a B. Okay, next we have his 8th studio album from 2010, which is a cover album titled Scratch My Back, and I'll give this a C. This is a weird one to score because I do enjoy this record. I think it's a really nice selection of cover songs that showcase Peter Gabriel's eclectic taste in music, but at the same time, I'm always a little bit more critical of cover albums because at the end of the day, I would always rather have an album of new material. But, regardless of that, there are still some good things on here. It's 12 tracks long and features a wide range of covers featuring artists both old and new, and the majority of the arrangements and interpretations on here I do think are tasteful. There are a couple of covers that I'm not crazy about, but I do find most of the tracks enjoyable. In general, though, I don't tend to be as generous with my scorings of cover albums because I would always prefer to hear new material over covers. And for me to give a cover album a high score, it really needs to be filled with covers that I like more than the originals, and I wouldn't say any of the tracks on here meet that criteria, but despite that, I do think there is a nice selection of covers on here. My favorite interpretations would be David Bowie's Heroes, as well as Listening Wind by the Talking Heads, The Boy in the Bubble by Paul Simon, Philadelphia by Neil Young, and The Power of the Heart by Lou Reed. And this is definitely one of those records that I very rarely ever see myself revisiting. Like I said, I usually prefer the original versions of all of these songs, but regardless of that, I do think there are some nice arrangements, and it is cool to get some insight into Peter's diverse taste in music and how he chooses to interpret these tracks. So kind of a weird one to score because, like I said, I don't think it's bad, but at the same time, I don't like any of these covers more than the originals, and I don't really ever find myself going back to this record, so it feels fitting to put it in C tier. So I will give this a C. Okay, next we have his 9th studio album from 2011 titled New Blood, and I will also give this a C. This is another album that doesn't feature any new material, but instead gives us orchestral arrangements of various tracks from Peter Gabriel's career. And the thoughts that I had about Scratch My Back are very similar to this album. I appreciate the song choice, and I do think these orchestral arrangements are very pretty. But again, I would still rather have an album of new material over anything else, because this is another record that I don't find myself going back to very often. With almost all of these tracks, I would rather listen to the originals than these versions. But of the 14 tracks on here, I do think the majority of them are very good. The only couple of tracks I'm not crazy about would be A Quiet Moment, San Jacinto, Wallflower, and Mercy Street. One track that I do absolutely love, though, is The Nest That Sailed the Sky. I love the instrumentations on that one, and I'm a huge fan of the French classical composer Maurice Ravel, and that track definitely gives me some Ravel vibes, which I love. So while I do enjoy the arrangements and the majority of the song choices, I can't justify giving it a higher score solely on the fact that I barely ever go back and revisit it, just like with the cover album. And in general, like I said, I'm just less generous with scorings of albums that are either covers or re-recordings of songs that were already, released over records with new material, which I would have preferred. So I do feel weird putting an album that I have a lot of good things to say about into C tier, but these types of albums always end up in weird sorts of gray areas for me when I'm doing my scoring, so I'm going to have to give this one a C. Okay, and lastly, we have his 10th and most recent studio album from 2023 titled I.O., and I will give this an A. I think this is a great album and was a very pleasant surprise after years and years of thinking that we would never get another record of Peter Gabriel originals. This album was decades in the making, with initial production dating all the way back to the same time as the Up album in 1995, and this record was initially intended to be a follow-up to that album, but in classic Peter Gabriel fashion, it would repeatedly get delayed and re-recorded until he would finally complete it in 2022, and everything about the presentation and release of this record is very unorthodox. The album is 12 tracks long, but you get 2 different mixes per track, with one disc being the bright side mix and the other disc being the dark side mix, and he would release each song as a single every month when there was a full moon, and the alternate mix would be released on the following new moon. And since it's 12 tracks long, the process would play out over the course of a year, which is a very interesting way to release an album and shows you that Peter's creativity is still very much active in the present day. As far as the songwriting goes, I think these tracks are of very high quality and deliver some classic Peter Gabrielisms, drawing on different influences from a variety of different albums from the previous decades. And lyrically, there is a lot of commentary on phones and technology and the lack of human connection that can be a side effect of the modern day technology. And it's very interesting hearing Peter Gabriel's outlook on technology in the present day, because in the 70s and 80s he was always of the mindset that you should embrace the technology and do what you can to further expand the musical capabilities with it. And it's interesting hearing his perspective shift now after seeing what 50 years of technology playing out has turned into. The record starts out with Panopticon, and right from that opening track I was very intrigued with the sound and the direction that he chose to go in, and from that point on it is a very solid selection of tracks with multiple standouts for me, with my number one favorite being the title track I.O., which might even be a contender for my top 5 favorite Peter Gabriel tracks. I think that song is exceptionally beautiful, with one of the most uplifting and hopeful feeling choruses of any Peter Gabriel song. Some other favorites of mine on here would be Playing for Time, which is a beautiful piano ballad with amazing string backgrounds, and the melody and chord progression give me flavors of Randy Newman, which I love. And I also love Four Kinds of Horses, Olive Tree, and Love Can Heal. Olive Tree has that classic upbeat feel-good Peter Gabriel pop vibe similar to what we hear on the title track, and Love Can Heal is a really pretty ballad with beautiful female backing vocals in the chorus that add an additional layer of beauty to it. The only song on here that I'm not crazy about is Road to Joy, but other than that, I think the remaining 11 songs are all very good, and unlike what I said about the Us album, I do think this one was well worth the wait and gave us countless Peter Gabriel tracks that will forever be timeless in his discography. And this year he did announce that he is working on a follow-up to this titled OI, so this might not be the last that we hear of Peter Gabriel, but if this does end up being his last record, I think it was an incredible one to go out on, definitely leaving off on a high note. So a very good last record to date. This one gets an A. All right, we did it. We went through his 10 studio albums, and this is what I came up with. Peter Gabriel is another artist that has so much diversity of thought within his fan base, and every album ranking that you look at is bound to be different from the next, and depending on what side of his sound you resonate with, I think you could make a compelling case for most of his albums being one of his best pieces of work, and I think that's the mark of a very good artist. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was enjoyable, and if you're interested, please feel free to check out some of my other tier lists linked in the comments and the description and see if there's anything else that you might like, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments where you agree and disagree and how you would rank these 10 albums. I would love to see your lists. All right, that is it for today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.